morning.
Good morning, Pastor.
As we sort of come to the time in our church life as the interim time is winding down, I thought it would be important for us to go back to some of the developmental tasks we have been speaking about the last year or so. Hit me with that hill slide. And just as a reminder, that hill, that stands for the different developmental tasks we've been going through during our interim time, ages history. We look back at what God has done through Second Baptist Church, and we make new plans and look forward. But in order to do that, we have to say goodbye to the past. I is identity. We clarify our identity. Who are we as a church? What's our mission? What are our core values? Those kinds of things. Second L is leadership and organizational structure. Leadership, that's what I want to talk about today. We'll focus in on leadership today and next week. And then the final L is once we've gone through all those things, we're on the top of the hill, we can look forward and make new plans and look to the future. So again, the next 2 Sundays, I will be talking about the L, the leadership part of it. And when we talk about these developmental tasks, yes, there's sort of a pattern to them. There's sort of a, you go first, second, third, but they also kind of they're all interwoven with one another, and that in some cases the H folks are having trouble saying goodbye to the past, so stuck there. The other cases is that L, we've had to install new leaders, make new decisions on leadership way back in the beginning of the process. So for instance, the kids that go to kids' church are so happy for that. But that sort of leadership, that place of leadership needed to get occupied. So Sadie stepped up and she's doing that. But that happened, in the fall. Right? So again, these tasks, they're kind of all woven in together, even though there is a sort of logical linear progression to them. And also the last two, leadership and looking forward. And of course, many aspects of that cannot really be settled until a settled pastor gets installed. Because think about it, leadership. Who's one of the most influential leaders in a church? It's the senior pastor. So it makes sense that a lot of that would wait until a settled pastor comes. Also looking forward. Who's looking forward and making new plans and help leading the church in that? It is a settled pastor. So, and when I want to talk about leadership today, I want to just talk about one aspect, and that is influence. Okay? Leadership and influence are very closely tied together. Next week, we're going to talk about leadership and authority. Okay? So those are two different things. Leadership and influence. Leaders have influence. And in fact, when you make someone a leader, you're entrusting them with even more influence. But don't think, so some of you might be thinking, well, I'm not a leader, so I can cash out, I'll just check my Facebook. No, even if you're not a leader, you still have influence. The difference is leaders have more influence, but each one of us has influence over something. And that's what we're really going to focus on today, so that even if you're not a leader, you do have influence. And so we'll talk about that. But of course, pastors have a lot of influence, because they're one of the primary leaders in the church. Now, as an interim pastor, my job is to use my influence to do 2 things primarily. One is to keep us focused on God and pursuing Him. And the other is helping us go through these interim tasks. That's what I'm about. So I don't use my influence to change things. Right? I pretty much just use my influence to clarify things and get people looking towards God's more. In contrast, a settled pastor uses his influence to get the church pursuing a common vision and making changes necessary to best accomplish that vision. So you see the difference there? So in one sense, for me, it's sort of like, interim pastor, what's that? One of the frustrating things is I use my influence not to pursue and push and change. I use my influence to just say, guys, what do you think? Clarify, who are we? What's our mission? What are our core convictions? Let's just state them so that we can be clear and be unified and come to an understanding. But it's not changing. So I know some of you are like, oh, Pastor, you're the settled pastor. Be careful what you wish for. Because you might be thinking, oh, Pastor Joe's doing such a good job, everything, because nothing's changed. But see, that's not my job. If I were settled pastor, then my job would be, this is the vision, yes, this is our mission, this is who we are. Based on that, let's go pursue this vision and make the changes necessary to get that. And whether that would be me or somebody else, that's the settled pastor's job, is to speak a clear vision and then use his influence to get everyone on board moving in that same direction. Again, be careful what you're asking for. But as people with greater influence, any kind of leader, any kind of pastor, this is the example of how leadership and influence are connected, is that pastors, like any kind of professionals, right, they have certain ethics that they have to follow because they are more responsible, because they have more influence. So the basic one that we all get is, leaders don't use their influence for personal gain. So I can't use my influence to try to get all the church members to give me their unicorn and rainbow Lucky Charms or something. You know how I like those unicorns and rainbows, right? So, I get pressure on people. Give me those Lucky Charms, right? Just like that little, that kind of guy. Right, so that's one thing. Another thing is, I've been a pastor in a couple of different churches in an interim. I also need to be careful with my influence, that I release people from my influence, so that in previous churches, when folks call me up, like, hey, Joe, you're my pastor, so, and they start telling me this stuff, and I'm like, no, I cannot be involved. I released you from my influence. I can't influence you anymore. Right? That's not ethical. You need to connect with your current pastor. You need to connect with your church and get on board with them. So don't bring me in, and I have to intentionally put barriers up, right, to previous ministries, because there's influence there, and I'm responsible for that influence. But in other professions have that too, counseling or whatever, doctors, anyone in leadership understands that they're responsible for their continued influence. So that's what we have to focus on. Influence. That is one important part of leadership. So not everyone's a leader, but everyone has influence. And whether you're a leader or not, what I want to focus on today is that the most steady and long-term way to influence those around you is through your example. It's through your example. Again, leaders are often given authority to make decisions. We'll talk about that next week. But anyone can influence those around them through example. And so when we're looking to lead, or we're looking for leaders, one of the most important considerations is leading by example, is influencing by example. So the Apostle Paul, he understood the importance of this, and so when he is instructing Timothy, who is sort of an important, a younger guy that he's raised up in the ministry, and he sends Timothy to different churches that he started, and Timothy is supposed to help influence those churches towards the gospel and stay the true gospel course. Paul he tells Timothy, pay close attention to your example, because how you influence that church you're in is going to primarily be through your example, even though he also had authority. So Timothy got authority from Paul, so he had authority too, but Paul says, yes, you have authority, but make sure you focus on your example. That's going to influence. So for instance, in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 12 through 16, this is what the Apostle Paul says to Timothy. Let no one look down on your youthfulness, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. Show yourself an example of those who believe. Until I come, give attention to the public reading of Scripture, to exhortation and teaching. Do not neglect the spiritual gift within you, which was bestowed on you through the prophetic utterance with the laying on of hands by the presbytery. Take pains with these things. Be absorbed in them, so that your progress will be evident to all. Pay close attention to yourself and to your teaching. Persevere in these things, for as you do this, you will ensure salvation both for yourself and for those who hear you. Timothy was sent to influence churches. But Timothy, he started out with a disadvantage. And that was, he was a young whippersnapper. And he was a youngin'. He was a youngling. And in that culture, so our culture, we're kind of obsessed with youth. You know, if it's youth, be young, drink Pepsi and all that stuff. We're obsessed with youth. But in that culture, people look down on your youth because you didn't have the experience. So Paul, he says to Timothy, let your actions override your appearance. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that being an insult, but in this case it's good. Let your actions override your appearance. You're young, you appear young, but if you're in your actions you prove to be an example, they'll follow your example. Let me look at this in verse 12. Show yourself an example. In speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example. So, when the church is asking, all right, well, how does a Christ follower, how do they look, how do they act when it comes to what they say? They can look at Timothy, his example, and they'll know. How does a Christ follower, what do they look like when in their conduct? They can look at Timothy, and his example teaches louder than his words. His example influences the church more than his teaching. Timothy influenced them by the way he lived. So take a moment and think. Right, if someone followed you around for this next week, yep, so there's creepers around there. I mean, it's not like that. They're creeping on you, following you around. No, if someone followed you around for this next week and observed your speech, your conduct, your faith, your love, your purity, what example would you show them? This is what it means to be a Christian. Think about the words. Think about the words that come out of your mouth this week. Was it lots of encouragement? Was it gossip? Was there lots of truth? Or were there lies and deceit? Was there cursing? Or this blessing? You see, you are increasing those things in your environment. That's how you're influencing it. So, in other words, if you bring lots of encouragement with your words, guess what? Your family has more encouragement in it. Your church has more encouragement in it. Your community has more encouragement in it because you've spoken that encouragement. And by example, you influence your environment. Whatever that environment may be. Your family, your church, your home. Think about your conduct. When people follow you around, what would they learn? What would they learn about your priorities? What would they learn about your sense of right and wrong? What a Christian is, how a Christian spouse acts. See, unfortunately, sometimes when people look at our example, the example we give is, you know what, I act this way on Sunday, but I act this other way through the rest of the week. That's why people say Christians are hypocrites. Why? Because they see our example. Oftentimes that's the example we give. But what example do you give of love? Of faith, of purity? You influenced your family, your church, your community this week through your example. Where did you help lead it? Where did your influence help push it towards, wow, this is an environment of encouragement. This is an environment of truth and love. This is an environment of integrity. We influence our environment through our example. No wonder Paul emphasizes the importance of Timothy's example. You notice he doesn't emphasize, Timothy, I've given you apostolic authority. Go do this. Tell them to shape up or shape out. Yes, he has authority. Yes, he corrects teachers, the false teachers. But he emphasizes here in this thing, like look at verse 15. Take pains with these things. Be absorbed in them so that your progress will be evident to all. In other words, people can just look at Timothy and say, oh, look at where Timothy's going. Look at his progress. If I want to make some progress towards Christ, that's what it looks like. Okay, I can follow Timothy's example. Well, look at verse 16. Pay close attention to yourself, to the example you're giving, and to your teaching. Persevere in these things. Because Timothy's faithful living, consistent faithful living, will steer the churches that he's in, will influence the churches that he is in onto God's path that leads to salvation for himself and for those he's following him. So influence. Leadership involves influence, and on a very basic level, influence happens through example. Example is a powerful influence, or even more so than our words, because the distance between the word or the example and execution is shorter when it comes to example. What I mean by this is you can teach someone, hey, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, right? You explain it to them. What do they need to do? They need to first understand what you're talking about, and then they need to figure out, right, what does that look like? How do I live that out before they do it? Whereas an example, they just need to look and they can mimic, right? Oh, this is what it looks like to be a person of integrity? Okay, I think I can do that in my words and my speech. So you see the distance between presentation and execution with example is shorter. That's why people will pay much more attention to your actions than your words anyways. I have a relative or friend, right, I'm being very vague here because you're listening, a relative or friend, listening online or not, who they have really bad potty mouths, okay? So they swear up a storm. They swear like sailors, right? Always dropping F-bombs here and there. And, well, not too long ago they had children. That's nice. Well, when their children got to the age where they started talking, little Johnny, not his real name, little Johnny starts dropping F-bombs. And they were flabbergasted. They said, oh, we don't want our little kids swearing like that. And so they're trying to teach their child, hey, you can't swear, you can't say those words. But he kept doing it. Why? Because the example. Right? Your example, if you're trying to learn what is right, what to do, your actions speak louder than words. So it didn't matter what they were teaching. What mattered is what they were doing. And that's true with everything. The distance between presentation and execution is much shorter in example. So we always pay more attention to example. Our example is always more influential than our words. Again, the Apostle Paul understood this. And he backed up his teaching. So not only did he tell Timothy to be an example, he backs up his teaching in Philippi with leading by example. Look at Philippians 3:17. Paul says to the church in Philippi, brethren, join in following my example, and observe those who walk according to the pattern that you have in us. And then later in the letter, in chapter 4, verse 9, he says, the things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So here Paul's saying, I'm giving you an example, but then he also says, the things you saw in me, the example that you saw, you do them. So you be an example. You do the do, right? We got to do the do. Now, I know that's already been trademarked by Mountain Dew. Chris Mullins will attest to that. He's always drinking Mountain Dew. So you might not be able to use that, do the do, but just think of it, all right? You don't have to pay royalties if you just think it. But it's the thing. That's what Paul's saying. He's saying, I've done this, now you do that, and those people who are watching you, they'll do it as well, because of the power of example. It should never be do as I say, not as I do. It should always be do the do. Yeah, registered trademark. I have to look at Jesus. Now Jesus, he had ultimate authority. He has primary authority. He can just tell people what to do as the Son of God. But when he teaches, he would teach often using example. So, for instance, when he wanted his disciples to learn about humility, about servant leadership, and that's a whole other category of leadership that we don't have time, but we're going to talk about that hopefully another time, that Christian leadership, servant leadership. But when Jesus wanted to teach them about that, he took on the role of the lowest servant. You might know the story. People gathered together, and it was, the Last Supper time, and the disciples came in, and Jesus, and no one washed one another's feet. And that day, you needed to wash people's feet because they're all dirty and nasty. No one did it. So Jesus, he takes the bowl, he takes a towel, and he washes his disciples' feet. And this is what he says when he's done. This is found in John 13, 12-17. It says, so when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and reclined at the table again, Jesus said to them, do you know what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I gave you an example, that you should also do as I did to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a slave is not greater than his master, nor is one who is sent greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. So the blessing comes not just in the knowing, but in the doing. And notice, Jesus didn't simply teach them about humility. Hey, you should be more humble in what you do. He demonstrated it to them in two ways. First, by washing their feet, by not just saying, hey, be humble and wash one another's feet. He gave them an example, and he said, okay, now you do it. I've done it, you do it. But that whole foot washing thing, it also is a foreshadowing of his work on the cross, where Jesus gave his life. He came from heaven and let go of all of his heavenly rights and prerogatives to become a person and give his life for us. And Jesus says, yeah, that's the example of humility that you can follow. But again, Jesus, he has the authority just to teach, and we're supposed to do it. But he also shows us by example. Because our example is powerful. If we really want people, if we really want to influence, we need to follow. We need to give an example. So I was thinking of this when my kids got older. So I remember we were at the dinner table and eating, and Wendy said to the kids, take some vegetables. They took the meat, they took the potatoes. They didn't take the vegetables. So Wendy would say, take the vegetables. And you know what they did, of course? They looked at my plate. And they said, well, Pa hasn't taken any vegetables. So what did I have to do? From that day on, I had to realize, all right, I have to take vegetables. And I have to eat them. And it was almost like going back to when I was younger, when my parents made me eat vegetables, and I don't like cooked peas, I like raw peas, but I have to swallow the peas whole because I just didn't like it. But that's what I had to do to be an example. So the point is that if I truly wanted, my children to follow what their mother was saying, I had to as well. And that's because of the power of example. I could have said, just do what your mother says, but I don't need to. But that would have increased the conflict, made it much more difficult than just saying, no, all right, I'll provide an example. I'll take these vegetables, and I will even eat them. And I will pretend to smile and ask for more. All right, that's too far. I didn't ask for more. But I did eat the vegetables that I put on the plate. So the point is whether it's Jesus, whether it's the Apostle Paul, Timothy, Regina, down the road, our influence and our example go hand in hand. That's what I want us to understand. Influence and example, as well as leadership and influence. They're all tied together. So how do we apply this? How should we apply it? Well, understand that we lead by example. So when you're asking yourself, who am I trying to influence? think about people in your life that you're trying to influence. Maybe it is your children. Maybe it's your church. Maybe it's your co-workers. Maybe it's your friends. And even if you think it's subtle, your most consistent influence will be by your example. And you might say, well, I don't want to influence anyone. I don't want to lead. Well, whether you want to or not, you will influence your environment by your example. But think about that. Even when you go to a store, a grocery store, any kind of store, you influence what the store keeps on its shelves because people keep track of that stuff. You know, Wendy more than me, always the packaging, right? The packaging that, and you go to the store, you buy something, and it comes with so much packaging. And we're like, why do we need all this packaging? But our landfills are filling up, killing the earth, and yet, things still have a lot of packaging. Why? Because we still buy them. And our choices, our example, influence our environment. And that's why the stores keep doing it, because with our example, we influence what they decide. Which makes me wonder, who is still buying pickled lamb stumps? I mean, why are those in the store still? I mean, ever since I was little, I would say, that is so gross. Look at those pickled lamb stumps. And they're still on the shelf. So someone is still buying them, because otherwise they wouldn't stop. I don't know. You don't have to raise your hand. I mean, it's your choice. But I know someone's buying them because they're still on the shelves.
It's been in it for years.
You know, it also makes me think of the Vine Project. We're just wrapping up the Vine Project phase 1 and phase 2. And one of the primary things that we talk about is the Vine Project is about getting people to take a step towards Jesus. That having a discipleship culture in our church, that one of our primary missions is growing disciples, causing people to take a step towards Jesus in every interaction, every program. That's what we do. And one of the things that it talks about is that in order for this to be not just a program, but to really have an effect in the church, is that we have to reach a critical mass. Meaning that there has to be enough people who are actually living this out, or actually integrating it into their life, getting people to take a step towards Jesus, that we reach a critical mass where there's so many examples of people helping each other, helping neighbors and friends take a step towards Jesus, that it just becomes a part of who we are. It just becomes a part of our culture. But you get to have that critical mass. Otherwise, what happens is that you've got more counter-examples than true examples, or examples of what you're trying to do. Because our choices influence others. Our example influences others around us, especially because we're a body of believers. We're all interconnected. And of course, that is true of everybody. Your example carries influence, but it's even, your influence is even greater as a leader, because you've been entrusted with a position that can make decisions, that oversees things. So therefore, you have even more influence. Leaders carry more influence because they have connection with more people. And for this reason, I think leadership is one of those developmental tasks that we talk about, because it's so important. Point number 2 of application. So yes, we pay attention to our example, but also, I think point number 2 on a church-wide level is when we're looking for leaders, the basic consideration for any leader is, well, do they do what I want others to do? Do they do the do? Because leaders influence more. If you ask someone to lead, you're entrusting them with more influence. And so the basic question is, well, are they doing what I want other people to do? Because they're going to have more influence. So you might be asking, well, how does that work? One of our distinctives as a Baptist church is we're congregationally governed. So what does that mean? That means that the ultimate authority of the church resides in the congregation, in the membership. So that the congregation ultimately decides, for instance, well, who's our leaders? Like, who's the lead pastor? Who's the other leaders? All of that, we have to approve that at the congregation level. Our budget, all of those things. That is decided as a congregation. But within that, we do, as a congregation, designate. we entrust people with leadership, right? And so for us, in our church, we do things a little bit different in that we have a single board. So most churches have like elder, pastor types, overseers, and deacons. We have a single board. And the single board has influence and authority to make decisions and help the spiritual direction of the church. So for us then, that question would be, all right, when we entrust someone with that kind of, those decision-making abilities and authority, I think one of the basic questions is, all right, well, are they providing an example? Do we want people to look at them and say, yes, that's the example I want to follow? Some people think, we should get different people involved in leadership. That is true, but what's more important than different people is example people. Whether they're new and different, or whether they're old and been around a long time, the bigger and more important consideration is, do they give an example of that? That's someone I want to follow. That's someone, when the church looks, they can say, yeah, I want to follow that person. Now, what we want maximum participation in is ministry service, right? We want everyone to participate, to get into a ministry where they can pour themselves into and grow. That's different than leadership. Right? Leadership has more influence. And it's okay to raise the bar. It's okay to raise the bar for leadership when we understand that dynamic between leadership and influence. All right, the last point I want to make there is, you may be hearing this and you might be thinking, oh, so leaders have got to be like perfect people. And I had a first service, one person who I think is a great leader said, I'm not a very good leader. And then I thought to myself, no, because you say you're not, you probably are. Because a Christian leader is ultimately someone who follows Jesus Christ. See, Christian leaders, we never get past following Jesus. We never get past this conviction that I don't want anyone following me, I want them to follow Jesus. That it's not about me. It's about following Jesus. Be an example of what is it like to follow Christ. And when Paul says to Timothy, be an example of faith, what does he mean? Well, in the Christian faith, you know what that means? It means that I trust in Christ. I don't trust in myself. I don't trust in my own abilities. That, in fact, whenever I trust in my education or my experience or anything like that, you know what I end up doing is I get people following me. That's bad news. That's bad news. That's my life. But when I'm following Jesus and understanding that it is only that I have to trust in Him, that He's forgiven my sins, that I have to constantly, daily ask Him to fill me with His Spirit, then I can say, yeah, okay, you can follow me because I happen to be following closely after Jesus. This is what the Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11:1. Right? Whenever he says, be imitators and watch what I'm doing and then you can do it, it's always with the understanding that the Apostle Paul is following Jesus closely. But in 1 Corinthians 11, he actually explicitly says it. He says, be imitators of me, just as I also am of Christ. You see, in our confession, in our reliance upon God's grace, we provide an example. You see, one of the ways that leaders provide an example, Christian leaders, is by confessing, is by admitting that, sometimes I've used my influence, both before I was a Christian and after I was a Christian, for poor ends. I've used my influence badly in the world. But a part of the Christian experience is saying, but as a leader, I understand that unless I'm following Christ, it's all worthless. I'm leading you astray if I'm not following Christ. Christian leaders understand the faith requirement of trust in Christ. Not in ourselves, not in our work, not in my experience, not in my talents, but that it's only through God's Spirit that I can lead others towards Christ in my example, in my daily living. So my friends, whether we want to or not, we will influence our family, we will influence our church, we'll influence our community. What example are we giving? Where are we leading? Our influence, where are we pushing our family with our influence? Where are we pushing our church with our example? And if you're in leadership, understand that you have even more influence. And therefore you're pushing people in certain directions. That's what that happens with me. That my influence pushes people in certain directions. You can be careful about that. But as Timothy learned from Paul, let us first and foremost recommit to following Christ alone and depending on Him. But then let's also, as he said, show ourselves as an example. In speech, conduct, and love, and faith, and purity, so that our progress will be evident to all. So people can look and say, what does it mean to be a Christian? Oh, that's what it looks like. Let's pay close attention to ourselves, persevering to ensure salvation both for ourselves and for those who hear.